Welcome. I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the BBTV network. Now, as soon as someone says, trust me, my experience says to me, don't. The word trust should be sacrosanct and not abused, but it is. Worryingly, I think the abuse of trust is getting worse. Or is it that we're all suddenly acknowledging its importance and that we're noticing it? Recently, I had the privilege to meet renowned David Horsager of TrustEdge to discuss his book, and it's this one here, Trusted Leader. I'm loving it. Do you know, it smells just, David, just the same as it did when I got it. It's
that means you haven't read enough.
Yeah, probably. It's brand new. And so, as often happens, I didn't get enough of his valuable time last time to dive deeper into trust, especially trust in today's altered business world. So today we're fortunate, or you might just have heard, that David is a very welcoming returning guest for that deeper dive into trust. Welcome back, David.
Hey, thank you so much, Malcolm. It is a treat to be here. It's raining in Minnesota in the USA. It's raining in the UK where you are, but let's bring a little sunshine to this talk.
Oh, very poetic. And talking about that, I got this, you know, your last appearance with us, guesting with us, caused so many comments and that, which were wonderful. But I've got to read out one from one reader. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Trust takes time to build, seconds to destroy, and forever to repair. Very poetic, eh?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. That's right up there. We got the UK Shakespeare's coming out. It's true, though. It's true.
It is, isn't it? It is. Those seconds, aren't they? They're just like that, and it's gone. You know.
There's a truth to that, and there's also a truth that though if you build it for a long time, consistently, it actually doesn't always deteriorate so quickly. In fact, some will give you the benefit of the doubt depending on the type of trust you break. But indeed, it's still a very true quote in most circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, David, thanks for so soon agreeing to return visit. But you know, I've got to say to you, that word is just on the uttermost of everything. I'm so looking forward to chatting to you about trust today. Now, since we last met, as I said, almost every one of the many interviews I've conducted, the word trust has somehow been mentioned. So it's a word very much of the moment, but its meaning today is what I want to chat to you about. Viewers and listeners, I'll be talking to David in my usual three parts. My focus will be on trust and today's leader, especially in this new and altered world that we've just mentioned. And David is exactly the person we should be all listening to. His book, remember, Trusted Leader, 8 Pillars That Drive Results, was only published this year, 2021. So we're not talking old thinking, but rather of the moment. In part 1, I'll be talking to David further about the evolution of trust during this pandemic. In part 2, I want to ask him how we balance the need to be agile and act fast while maintaining trust in leadership. And in part 3, I'm going to discuss with him something that has reared its head across my many other interviews, and that is, can you measure trust? But first, David, before we get into 3 parts, just remind us who David Horsager is and what you trust will be the result of buying and reading this excellent book.
Well, I believe, it goes back to my graduate work when very few people were looking at trust this way almost 2 decades ago. I believe a lack of trust is the biggest cost of every organization, the biggest expense. I believe trust is always the leading indicator. You don't have a leader, if you remember last time, it's never a leadership issue. The reason I follow a leader or not is trust. It's not a sales issue. The reason I buy or not is trust. It's not a marketing issue. The only way to amplify a marketing message is trust. The only way to deal with diversity issues of our day is trust. The only way to increase learning in a classroom is increase trust in the teacher, the content, or the psychological safety or trust of the room. The only way to get more innovation is increase trust in the team. They share ideas. We have to deal with the trust issue. The reason I wrote my third book there is most people don't deal with the root issue. It's always a trust issue. And so, who am I? I'm a dad of 4 kids, husband. I'm CEO of TrustEdge Leadership Institute. We put out a significant piece of research every year on trust. I've authored several books. I speak around the world on trust. Some would say the most researched on trust, at least in certain parts of the world. But we basically, in the mission of our organization, is to develop trusted leaders in teams, organizations, and around the world. And we've done that in everything from pro sports teams to global governments. We have certified coaches on 6 continents using our work. And I'm passionate about seeing people use this framework for building trust to get the results they hope for.
I was thinking about you and our upcoming chat this week when I was reading about Bill Gates and his big divorce there. Somebody didn't trust somebody else, did they?
There's a trust issue, right? And to your third question, to give a little tease about what we'll talk about in just a few minutes, is I also invented, and it was overseen by PhDs and all my grad work and everything, but ways to measure trust. And so you're going to ask that question, but I'm the inventor of the Enterprise Trust Index and several other diagnostics so that we can close gaps that actually make a meaningful difference on sales, attrition, culture, and so forth.
Right. I can imagine there's lots of wives saying, "Oh, send me that, David."
Well, I'll tell you, that's a sad story because, by the way, it's emotional, even though it has, what we proved out in the research was trust has this hard edge. It affects the bottom line. It affects cost. I argued this on the last episode that I'm sure you'll share if people haven't heard it, but it affects time, cost, retention, attrition, but it just makes you sad when you see trust go down. To me, looking at the Gates marriage that you bring up, to me at least, that's sad for them. Like when trust is broken, it's sad. It's hard. We know where there's high trust, it's just so much great things happen. It's fun. It's exciting. It's positive. So that emotionally impacts me when I see the trust broken among many that had great influence that will lose some of it.
Yeah. It's so important, as you say, and that's why I'm so excited to meet you again. David, let's get straight into part 1 and build on our previous meeting. We're focused here at BizVision and BizVision BBTV on today's leadership, today's selling, today's buying, today's motivation, and so on. Now, many people, though, tell me that my thinking is just temporary and that soon all will go back to the way it was. I don't agree, especially around trust. Do you think there are key differences in the perception and delivery of trust as opposed to pre-pandemic? If so, where are they? And where is distrust the strongest today?
Well, you asked a lot of questions in one there, Malcolm.
I know. I tried to get my money's
one at
worth
a time.
Man,
you thought you were talking
to.
I can't keep up with you.
Money's worth.
I'll tell you what, we're slower here on the other side of the pond. I don't know if I can, but let me say a couple comments about this. So on one thing people say to me, David, it's so timely. This trust stuff is so timely. Look at our government, your issues with Brexit, we have the Trump, Biden, all these. Look at what's happening here. Look, it's so timely. We need more trust. That is true. And yet there is another truth that trust is timeless. When wasn't it the issue? So it is interesting what's happened over the last 2 decades of our research. People are starting to see it for what it is. But even way back 2008 at the World Economic Forum, these great leaders come together and they said, our biggest issue in this, you remember the kind of global downturn, they said our key issue, our greatest risk is not financial, it's actually a lack of trust. Yeah. And they said the exact same thing 10 years later at the World Economic Forum, I believe in China in 2018. So in one side, it's never been more relevant. We have t-shirts here that are made that say trust matters more than ever. So it does, but also it always has, and people didn't see it as the core issue. I think there's a truth there. But let's get to your point and your intent of it and what's happened in the pandemic and some of these things. First of all, since in the U.S., since Watergate, institutional trust has fallen quickly, deeply. So in the U.S., let me just take a couple things because they can be relevant globally, as you'll see. Government trust in the 1970s, about 60s, about 80% of Americans trusted their government to do what was best for them and for all people. Now it's around 7%. But institutional trust globally has gone down. So if you think of public schools in the U.S., used to be highly trusted. Now that's gone down and people want private schools, charter schools, even homeschooling has come into vogue when that used to be weird when I was a kid. food, big, groceries used to be high trust. Now people want to know that their food was grown next door in the garden next to them, and that cow was petted and sung to while it was growing if they want to eat it. It's like, so media, big media, actually this has led to some division, but big media is not trusted at all. And there's a problem here, by the way, in that we trust smaller media, but very polarized. Our little part of media and our little part of media. So then we don't, see the whole picture. Churches in the U.S., about the same percentage of people believe in God as did 50 years ago, but the number of people on any metric that would show that to an institution going to a place of worship, giving to a place of worship, meeting in a Bible study, all those are down steeply. So this was starting pre-pandemic. So this is one part. Institutional trust is down, but we have a huge opportunity. In fact, for the first time ever, your great Edelman Trust score global study also showed that business was the highest trust. I mean, people trusted business over media, over NGOs, over all these others. So we have a huge opportunity if we're in business. That's one thing. Now let's take a look even deeper at what you also asked, and that was about the pandemic.
Yeah.
As far as the pandemic, some things will never be the same, so get that out of your head, okay? Some things are going back to the way, closer to the way they were in certain ways. But some things that the pandemic showed, as far as trust is concerned, is we don't trust people that we don't feel like care about us.
Yeah.
So compassion became incredibly more important. Vulnerability and authenticity became incredibly more important. We saw CEOs that kind of stayed in their suits and ties and spoke to their people through virtual not stay as trusted, whereas CEOs that had the cat jump on their computer screen and their 4-year-old running in their undies behind them be more trusted. So there's a shift toward humanization that the pandemic amplified. Yeah. There are other changes, of course, as well, and that is things like technology that has come about more increasingly in the pandemic, like blockchain, that is actually, technology is polarizing as far as some technology is decreasing trust fast, some types of social media, and some types of technology, blockchain as an example, is increasing trust fast and the ability to use certain types of. So I just gave you a smattering because you asked a bunch of questions at once.
I know, but you know me, David. I like to get my value, but no, I certainly got the value in that answer. But what I really found fascinating about what you're saying is that trust comes in different guises, doesn't it? Here in the UK, we've had a problem. We're leading the world in how many vaccinations we've done, but there's a huge amount of population, especially in multicultural towns, everything, who don't trust the vaccination.
Yeah, we have that polarization here. There are people that do trust it. There are people that don't. That's a part of that whole low trust in media, and there's a whole lot we could talk about there, but. I'm more interested in how do we build trust as leaders and organizations, but there are reasons, that's a lot of that has to do with who you're listening to and what you see as proof and, what you trust, because, there's a massive problem with social media now, because, the algorithms work so that when we look at something, we keep looking at more of that thing. And so our minds have gotten more and more polarized because we just see that side. So if we're anti-vax, we're going to see every possible article keep coming up and agreeing and all that with anti-vax, which just affirms where we were maybe open at the beginning. Now we're just more anti-vax than ever. If we're pro-vaccine, the algorithms work in such a way that we would keep looking. Yes, look at that. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, those guys are idiots. And all of a sudden, we're not able to think and be open because we're feeling, we're only trusting one sliver, and that's a big problem.
Yeah. And just before we move to part two, I just made final comment there. It almost looks to me like that we're getting to a situation where trust has to be sold. We've got to say that you can trust his vaccination. Yeah.
But as you said, we do not trust people because they say, just trust me.
Yeah.
I don't ever trust someone because they say I've had people say, and you have salespeople say, well, you can trust me on this, or we're you know what? You got to show it, right?
Yeah.
And you got to show it in the data, the results, the compassion. And that's, as you know, the book shows the 8 pillars of trust. And really we'll get to it at the end, but that's what we measure against because we know these are true. We have to measure against these 8 to recognize and validate and vet if it is in fact worthy of trust.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Now, before we get to part 2, let me remind you, all viewers and listeners, of David's website URL, which is for viewers, as you can see on the screen behind me, and for listeners, it's an easy one, trustedge.com. You got that, listeners? Trustedge.com. And David's excellent book is called Trusted Leader, 8 Pillars That Drive Results, and it's published by Beret Kohler. Now, there's one bit in the framework. I know we're going to talk about the framework and that I've picked out as well. That David, I've done my usual naughty bit and put a sticky label in there so I can get straight to it.
Absolutely,
it's pillar 8. It's pillar 8, and it's the one that I keep trying to tell leaders, and I don't think it sinks in at times. Consistency. People love to see the little things done consistently. And one of the challenges, I think, with leaders, then they think, well, I'll do that and I've done it and I don't need to do it again.
Well, consistency is the king and queen of the pillars because whatever you do consistently is trusted. Think about this. If you're late all the time, I will in fact trust you to be late. Yeah. Consistency wins. If I'm a certain way all the time, I'll trust you to be that way when I'm not in the room. So that's why I might trust McDonald's. I've had the same burger on 6 continents. I might not even like McDonald's, but I'll trust them because I've had the same burger on 6 continents. So this is really important to be trusted. For good or bad, whatever you do consistently is what is trusted. And the only way to build a brand is consistency, not just of look, but of feel, how you interact. The only way to build a reputation is consistency. If you come in the same way, you talk the same way you do. So consistency is really consistent. And if you look at the other pillars, consistent character is trusted. Inconsistent character isn't. Consistent clarity. Let's take the first pillar and join them together. So clarity. People say, well, I shared the vision at the annual meeting, so I was absolutely clear. And yet nobody's clear because you're not sharing the vision every 14 days. And if you're not sharing it consistently, people don't know it. So they don't make decisions by it, which is the only reason to have a vision or values or mission or strategic plan. And that can't just be shared at the annual meeting. You have to share it consistently.
Yeah, excellent. And it's a really important lesson then. Now, my question for part 2. To survive and thrive in this new, altered, competitive world, a business leader needs the skills of agility and adaptability, which often means fast change. Now, I'm suggesting that this speed of change and reaction can possibly lead to a breach in trust. Do you agree? And if so, where's the happy medium?
Well, it can lead to a breach of trust. And by the way, there are ways to use consistency, even this pillar we talked about, against that situation, which is creating a consistent framework for being innovative, as an example. Now, let's get to your point in another way. You're right that we have to be adaptable and agile, but some people use that as a cop-out to be inconsistent. So we can be consistent in our values while adapting. We can be consistent in our mission. We have the same mission we did. How we apply it is different this year than last year, but you can have consistency in many, many ways, in your values, in your mission, in your values, in a host of ways, even while being innovative, adapting, being agile, and so forth. One entrepreneurial challenge is I'm writing in a book that'll come out someday about tensions, like true contradictions. So as an example, like we know the early bird gets the worm. Have you heard that?
Yeah, yes.
It's true. But have you ever also heard people say, be patient?
Yes. Yeah.
So both can be true, but they're true, right?
Yeah.
Or we can say, well, should I have should I specify or should I be generalist? Both could be good for a business. I mean, I've 13 different tensions that we deal with and have to make decisions around. One of those is persevere or pivot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we have people that kind of under this agility and adaptability say, yeah, we got to pivot. We got to pivot. We got to pivot. Right. And we've seen people win by pivoting. And we've seen people pivot too early, pivot all the time, pivot inconsistently, and lose. We've seen people persevere and they say the only reason we could build this business, we went through a brick wall. We persevered. And you'll see other people persevere right off the cliff and use everything, right? So you have to deal with this. But trust, the 8-pillar framework, you can leverage these to do the right thing in the midst of this tension by applying the 8 pillars, but it doesn't mean it's easy. But to so there's absolutely truth in what you said. You have to be able to be adaptable and agile, but you have to. But you need to stay trusted in it. So let's give one idea, one takeaway for your people. It's simple. Okay, many people say, leaders say, I lost trust because of change. Mm-hmm. When that's almost never the case. People are used to change since their diapers were changed. I mean, change is happening all the time. It might be getting faster in certain ways, technological and others, but change, we're all changing, right? Yeah. The reason they lose trust, many lose or gain trust in change, one reason is because they don't over communicate the why for change. So here's what happens is I've had leaders say to me, well, but I told them why we had to do this. They said it once, or they said it quietly, or they didn't share everything they could. Now, you know, and I know it's very difficult to have the right amount of transparency and vulnerability. Some things you can't share because of HR, legal, or quarterly earnings issues. Yeah. But most people don't share all that they could. And if they share all of the why that they could, they will have buy-in, backing, and motivation for their team will come around them in the change. They'll get it like, okay, we do need to pivot. I see it. But many leaders sit at the top and they make a change and they don't give the why. Yeah. And they lose.
Yeah, I totally agree there. And I've seen so many people pivot the worse than the ballet dancer. And, I was thinking, also, just as you talk now, the whys, it's very much like in selling as well. You need to make a contact with a prospect at least 8 times before you get anywhere with that prospect. So perhaps if you're going to do that change, may I suggest that you think of 8 sort of whys that you're going to communicate across there, or 8 times you're going to communicate that 8 why, and then keep repeating them. Is that it?
8. I like the 8. I like 8 times, like you said, because of the amount, 6 to 8 times. Yeah. We have a different thing that we call the 5 whys. And this, what I would have is, if you can come up with 5 reasons, 5 whys for the change. It's just a simple thing. So in those 8 times that you're talking about, the number of times, come up with 5. Here's the 5 whys that we're trying this. 1, the market's down here. Number 2, we lost this opportunity. Number 3, this, oh, wow, he's got 5 whys, not just 1. I think we'll follow him in this. Okay, next week. Remember, these are the 5 whys. Remember,
Yeah. And preparation is good. So commitment to the fact that you're going to do them 5 or 8, whatever it may be, it's that commitment that you're going to be consistent in communication. David, now for part 3. And I'm a bit unsure about this question, but it's reared its head many times recently. So I'm going to ask the fountain of all knowledge here. Now, everyone wants to measure everything, to turn something from the tangible into the intangible, or the intangible into the tangible. But my dilemma is that trust seems to me to be a personal, emotional thing. Can it truly be put into a quantifiable measure, or is that treating it almost as a commodity and denigrating its importance? And what should leaders do about measuring?
Well, you ready for the answer?
Yep, go for it.
Absolutely yes. Next question.
Yeah.
So here's the deal. Trust, like many things, can be measured. As you remember, Drucker, the great leadership guru, said something like, what gets measured gets managed, right? What gets measured gets dealt with. So have to, if it is in fact so important, and we believe it is always the leading indicator, everything lags compared to it, then how do we measure it? So the question for us was, how do we measure it? And you can measure it. Once you measure against these 8 that I'll talk about, you can measure that the trust, when I increase trust or close this gap of trust, then I sped up time. When I close this gap of trust, I increased retention. When I close this gap, I decreased attrition or whatever, or time to market. So how do we measure it? Well, we have 6 ways we measure, but it all comes back to what happened in my grad work, and now it's been revalidated by another outside university, and that is this 8-pillar framework. Yeah. And people might look at them in the book and see C's and think it's some motivational book. It's not. They all stand for a kind of a research funnel or a sphere of trust, how trust is built. So clarity is trusted, ambiguity isn't, and compassion is trusted. People that care beyond themselves. So those 8, we talked about them last time. You can go back to listen to that one, but we always measure against these 8. Now that's in a basic form. Okay. Now, how do we measure the 8? Well, we have 6 ways we measure trust as far as tools. We have everything from an enterprise trust index that's built on our questions in the 8-pillar framework, mixed with 30 years of Accenture data. That is an online survey that big companies use through about 72 questions to measure trust with organization managers, kind of like an engagement survey, except that measures trust and engagement. So you have everything from big down to a team assessment, down to a simple 5-question customer assessment that would compete with like a net promoter score, because these 5 actually drive referrals if you can see gaps and close them, all the way down to a self-assessment, a TrustEdge 360, a conversational trust diagnostic. So we have these 6 ways. If people want them or want to talk about them or want to get certified to use them, you can go to trustedge.com. We can help you. But these all go back to the 8 pillars. So as an example, the self-assessment has 3 behaviors questions for each of the 8 pillars. That's 24 questions. The team assessment, or the 360, have 40 questions, 5 behaviors for each of the 8 pillars. So those were, I worked with under a PhD that wrote the book on 360 gap analysis, and we found specific valid questions that would align with the behaviors that build these pillars. So you have to have the research that shows the 8 pillars, and then you have to have questions that are valid to measure. And that's how we measure it. And I could get more complex, I suppose, but that's simply, so we measure trust in teams, customers, clients, whole organizations, governments, and so forth. And we try to use the right assessment toward that end.
I see what I like about within the book, and each time we talked about it, it's sinking in more. And is the fact that what leaders are learning from this as well is what questions they should be asking of themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. Rather than just normally leaders, what questions they should be asking of their people. And that's important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so one thing I say is organizations don't change. Only individuals do. And I'll have people, when I speak at a big event, I'll be signing books at the back, and people come to, I love that trust stuff. Love that. My boss should have been here. They need that. My kids should have been here. My teenagers need that. My spouse needs that. They're not here. You're here and I'm here. And every time I can learn something about this work and I can do something about it. So number one, we have to start with ourselves. Individual. When an individual starts to build trust, then an organization, a country even can change, but it has to start with you. And so that's there was something else to be authentic I was going to share that I think would have been interesting there, but maybe it'll come back to me as we go.
But I can't do that, David, because sadly the satellite is about to leave us.
Okay, well, this has been a treat.
Take care. Bye-bye.